Ladies and gentlemen, our first session will begin shortly. Please be seated and turn off your cell phones. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to the Asan Symposium 2022 on this topic that we talked about today called Celebrating Korea-U.S. Relations 140 Years and Beyond. I want to start by thanking Chairman Jung Mong-jun of the Asan Institute for all he has done to support Korea-U.S. relations and for putting together this amazing symposium. I know in the past we've had a lot of people here, but due to COVID and some of the travel obstacles, it's great to see all of you here. You should also know that Chairman Jung is also an amazing tennis player, which he uses to foster U.S.-Korea relations. So thank you. My name is James Kim. I'm the chairman and CEO of AmCham Korea. And on behalf of the Asan Institute, I want to extend a warm welcome to every one of you. It is such an honor for me to moderate the session today. I have to say this is one of the most high caliber panels that I've ever moderated. It's obviously a very large panel as well, and I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of wonderful insights from everyone here. They're all truly experts on U.S.-Korea relations. It's quite remarkable that the U.S.-Korea bilateral relations have lasted for over 140 years. And now, given this new powerful chemistry between President Biden and President Yoon, I think we're off to just an amazing, amazing start. The chemistry that I witnessed with President Biden and President Yoon is just spectacular. And when you're meeting both presidents, you can see and feel this powerful dynamic. So I am very, very optimistic about the next several years and beyond, and hopefully another 140 years. With this in mind, I want to ask the panelists to focus on 3 questions during their opening remarks. As for the flow, I've asked the speakers to speak for around 3 to 4 minutes in the interest of time. And then I really hope that we'll have some time to open it up to the floor for any questions that you might have. So the questions that I wanted my panelists to cover are, what were some of the most memorable moments during this relationship? How has the relationship survived all these years and remained strong to this day? And what is your take on the secret that keeps this relationship so unique and so special? So let me start, and we deliberately decided to do it on an alphabetical basis. So let me start with the Honorable former Ambassador An Ho-young. He is currently the president of the University of North Korean Studies. He joined the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1979. And I've known Ambassador An now for many, many years. He was also the ambassador to Belgium. And I really enjoyed visiting him in Washington, D.C. And he's always provided amazing insights. So, Ambassador An, based on your extensive experience of covering both political and trade issues throughout your career, could you share some comments on my questions that I think the audience would love for you to talk about?
Well, James, the first question you raised was the memorable moments in 140 years of history between Korea and the United States. And I think, talking about 140 years, I think it can be split into 2 different periods. First 70 years, I would call it years of remote encounter. The second 70 years as years of close encounter. And then focusing upon the years of close encounter, I think there were 3 memorable moments or junctures, let me put this word, junctures, in the second part of our relationship. The first juncture, I think it happened during the Korean War. And then, well after the Korean War or during the Korean War, I think Korea made a clear choice for democracy, market economy, human rights, and rule of law. which later on we came to find are the very important elements to constitute something we are calling these days rule-based international order. And in my mind, the second important juncture came around 1990, when the Cold War came to an end. Why do I call it an important juncture? It's because RBIO, rule-based international order, in fact, it was limited to the free world during the Cold War. But after the Cold War, then it reached out to the whole world. RBIO, it reached out to the whole world, providing opportunity for Korea to improve our relations with former communist countries and providing opportunity for Korea to take advantage of this, in a sense, political, diplomatic, and economic opportunity. So in my mind, from 1990 up until 2017, I think the best years in Korea's modern history. But the third juncture, in my mind, is this very moment we are living through. Why do I say that? It's because RBIO is being challenged in many different parts of the world. And then that, I think, is the reason why we should be thinking again about what is the meaning of alliance between Korea and then the United States. This is not the time to be questioning about our choice made 70 years ago. In my mind, this is the time when we should be reinforcing once again the alliance relationship between Korea and then the United States, and then to think about how we can do something, make contribution to maintaining and defending rule-based international order. So I don't think I have time for the second question or third question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us a great start. I also remember when you accompanied President Obama to South Korea. And I know you were a real central part of it, and it was a special moment for so many of us who were part of that big visit. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, I'd like to turn it over to the Honorable Lee Hong-gyu, the amazing former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea. As a lot of you know, following 33 years in academia in the US and Korea, Mr. Lee entered politics in 1988, and he had numerous important positions that I just talked about. Besides being the ambassador to the UK, he was also the ambassador to the United States, and now he is the founder of the East Asia Institute, one of the leading nonpartisan think tanks in Korea. I have a chance to visit with Prime Minister, and he always has amazing, amazing insights. So I'm very privileged and honored to ask you to comment on the three questions that I talked about today. Prime Minister Lee?
With your permission, I have to say something personal about this morning's session, because I'm very proud of my two former students who spoke this morning, Park Jin and Jung Mong-jun. Both of them, from the days of their university days, I was quite certain that they will make, or they will try to do something great in the coming years. And my expectation was really fulfilled more than enough. Park Jin looked like a foreign minister even when he was a student. He acted like a future foreign minister. And he was very consistent throughout his career to maintain that posture. And I'm delighted that he finally became foreign minister at the most important juncture of our relation to the United States and to the rest of the world. So I'm very proud of it. After his graduation, he actually served a naval officer in our Navy, and I'm told that he did well there. But anyway, he also served as a member of the National Assembly, and all in all, he was really great. Now about Chung Mong-jun, you already know him so well, but I have to remind you that yesterday was a great day for him, because not only we started this conference yesterday, it's really great because last couple of years, Asan Institute couldn't hold a big annual meeting because of the corona situation. But for Chung Mong-jun, it was great because yesterday marked the 20th anniversary of 2002 World Cup games in Seoul and Tokyo. Korea and Japan co-hosted 2002 World Cup game, and that was a big event for Chung Mong-jun, because I proudly say that I don't know if anybody else could equal his position. His father, the late Mr. Chung Ju-young, brought the 1988 Olympics to Korea, and Chung Mong-jun brought the World Cup games to Korea, and I don't know any father and son who did that is both Olympics and World Cup game. And so I'm very proud of it, and yesterday we had a big celebration. By we I mean the football community in Korea, and last evening, of course, we had a big game between Korea and Brazil. Korea lost, but it was a good game, and after all, Brazil is at the moment #1 team in the world, so no complaint. And all in all, I'm very proud of the fact that these two gentlemen have been doing such a good job in his own field, but particularly for Korea in the world and the global community around the world. Well, now let me just say about my feeling about the topic of the conference, the U.S.-Korea relations last 140 years. It's very good, everybody was said, and I agree. But what made the relations so successful? I have been thinking about this last few days, and I came to the conclusion, two basic reasons. On the side of U.S., it was the tremendous influence of founding fathers of the United States. Because 19th century, after all, that first contact, the treaty was signed in 1882. That's 19th century. 19th century was basically the century of imperialism, particularly all the larger European countries competed to gain more colonies around the world, and that has become a fashion all around the country. And in fact, Japan, for example, followed that trend and tried to imitate what European countries like UK and France and Germany did. And U.S. fortunately became almost a single exception to this trend. It was a great country, had a great resources, but it didn't try to make the United States a great colonial empire. Now, exception is the Philippines, But as you know, the U.S. gained the control of the Philippines not through the colonial activities, but as a result of winning a war against Spain. So that was a kind of the post-war reward from the Spain, which lost the war to U.S. But anyway, all the U.S. leadership, not only the politicians, but entire American people, were not following the colonial trend of the big European countries. And it never thought in that terms. And that helped U.S. relations with many other countries, but particularly U.S.-Korea relations. From the beginning, we never thought U.S. has any colonial or imperialism in their mind. So all the relations since particularly 1945 shows that, and even today that's still in the minds of all the Koreans. The second, on the Korean side, this is an oversimplification, but it's important that in Asia and perhaps globally, Korea was somewhat unexpectedly from U.S. viewpoint, became basically a Christian country. When it comes to religion in Korea, we have more churches than anything else. Of course, we are traditionally Buddhist country, but in the last few years, and particularly in the period we are discussing, rapidly Korea became a Christian country, and we have maybe more churches than the Buddhist temples, and more people going to church on Sundays than most countries in U.S., the American continent, and Europe. Now this is very important because the fact that after Second World War, U.S. came to Korea, but they found that Koreans are basically Christians. And this furnished a basis for U.S.-Korea relations, which we could explain in many other ways. But I think I came to the conclusion that this is fundamental for guaranteeing automatic good relationship between U.S. and Korea. Well, that's my general perspective, and I already have spoken too long. Time is limited, so let me just stop.
You know, given your history and all you represent, you can have all the time in the world. Thank you. But thank you so much. Obviously, we're both big fans of Foreign Minister Park Jin. I'm glad he trained him well. He should be an amazing foreign minister going forward. And then combined with you know, the U.S. Embassy and our charge, Krista Corso, I'm very confident about the many years ahead. So thank you so much for all your coaching. And now I'd like to turn it over to former Ambassador Lee Jun-gyu. Ambassador Lee currently serves as the chairman of the Asan Institute. In fact, he's the one who really made this event happen today. He was also the Korean ambassador to Japan, India, and New Zealand. I know we have some of the ambassadors from some of these countries here with us today. He's also served in a variety of roles within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Ambassador Lee, you're obviously leading the symposium. Thank you so much for hosting. So I'd love to hear your perspectives given your whole history.
Thank you, James. because the time given to me is quite short, I just would like to touch upon, as a former ambassador to Japan, on the influence the United States has had on Korea-Japan relations. In 1882, when Joseon concluded the friendship treaty with the U.S., the Article 1 of the treaty states like this: if other powers deal unjustly or oppressively with other government, the other will exert their good offices on being informed of the case to bring about an amicable arrangement, thus showing their friendly feelings. By having this article, it seems that the Joseon government expected the United States to act as an active protector when Korea's independence was in jeopardy. But, as you know, when the Taft-Castro agreement of 1905 became known later, the Korean people felt very disappointed with the United States. There are still many people in Korea who believe that this agreement was an important trigger for Japan to colonize Korea, even though it might be a misunderstanding. And later, the victory of the United States in the war with Japan was an important opportunity for Korea to be freed from Japanese colonial rule. One more very important scene of US influence with regard to Korea-Japan relations is, after liberation on August 15th, 1945, the US military government expelled the Japanese from Korea and did not allow their assets to be taken out of Korea. This was a very bold move and important action for Korea's future. After the Korean War, the Syngman Rhee administration transferred most of those accumulated assets to private companies, which became precious capital for Korea's rapid economic development. Many big names like Samsung, LG, Hyundai have these kinds of origins. Negotiations for normalization of diplomatic relations between Korea and Japan actually began in 1951. But there was no sign of a conclusion even after 10 years. It is known that the Kennedy administration of the United States played a role in the middle between the two governments, which was decisive for signing of the 1965 Korea-Japan agreement. Relations between Korea and Japan continued to fluctuate even after the establishment of diplomatic ties, and at every major turning point where relations deteriorated, the US advice and involvement in the process of improvement worked positively. This is because US involvement in Korea-Japan relations is linked to US interests. Since the United States is a bilateral alliance with South Korea and Japan, and the need for trilateral cooperation between Korea and Japan naturally arises. Also, the fact that all of the rare support bases of the US troops stationed in Korea under the banner of the UN command are in Japan. That fact is a major factor to be considered. Relations between Korea and Japan have deteriorated to the point of being the worst in the last 5 to 6 years. And since the new administration of President Yoon Suk-yeol took office in Korea, there are signs of improvement. It is speculated that President Biden, who visited Japan right after his visit to Korea at the end of last month, expressed hope and expectation for the improvement of Korea-Japan relations to the leaders of the two countries. Since the US involvement in Korea-Japan relations is fundamentally based on goodwill, it seems that there is not much objection to the involvement from the two countries. It would be good for Korea-Japan relations to develop smoothly without the involvement of the United States. But given the nature of the two countries' bilateral relations, there will surely be ups and downs in the future again. The goodwill involvement of the United States appears to have no choice but to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments today. We all heard from the speakers today that the U.S.-Korea relations is really, really aligned now, and we hope that the relationship going forward with both China and Japan will also improve. So thank you so much for everything that Asan Institute does to enhance that relationship.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
And now I want to turn to Dr. John Litton. He is the professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the College of Medicine and the director of Yonsei University Severance Hospital. And I want to say this very seriously. We have amazing panel members today. But for me, Dr. John Litton is my most important panelist. He's also my personal doctor. So it's very, very important for me. Obviously, he is a veteran doctor. And for those who don't know his history, he was the first foreign national to pass Korea's exam for medical practitioners in 1987. He was also the first to introduce an ambulance vehicle here in Korea. He was also the first to receive dual citizenship as both an American and a Korean. In fact, I think that all the Koreans revere the kind of contribution that Dr. Litton and his family has made to South Korea. So, Dr. Litton, your deep commitment and contributions to the lives of Korea, I think symbolizes this bilateral, relationship between Korea and the U.S. And people like you offer such special chemistry that allows all of us to move forward together. So we'd love to hear from you because you come from a complete different background, but you touch so many people's lives.
Thank you very much for the very, very kind words that probably I'm unworthy of. I want to thank Chairman Lee for organizing this event. I think it's extremely important to talk about the past. Understanding the past helps you in the future. And I am here very humbly. My family we're not like the Underwoods in Seoul, but we were in the Jeolla provinces, so we come from a very humble background. My grandmother was born in Mokpo in 1899, and my father was born in Kunsan in 1926, and I was born in Cheonju. So we go back a long ways, and I feel that I'm here more because of my family than my own achievements. 한국말로 하면 훨씬 편할 텐데 참 힘들어요.
You may speak in Korean. Why not?
The foreign minister Park Jin is my older brother, and he said that we have to speak in English, so we'll keep the rule. When I first started thinking about what to talk about, I thought about the horrible incidents that happened with North Korea, the Kim Shin-jo incident, the Pueblo incident, the tree cutting incident, the downing of the KL airliner, and then Aung San, which was probably the worst assassination attempt. And our relationship, I want to point out, has survived through not just good things, but through very difficult times. I want to point that out. During the time of the Japanese, for example, that made Korea suffer so much. The story is they were here 36 years. In actuality, I would say it's more like 50 years. But I want to go back. My staff said you can't talk about negative things, so I want to keep it positive. Let's talk about, in 1882 was a treaty. Kojong, I feel, a lot of people are very critical of the last Korean king, Kojong, but he had a really difficult time because France and England were very powerful countries. Germany was a very powerful country. And then around Korea, you have Japan, which was threatening Korea's survival even back then. And then you have China, which has been powerful a long time, and the emerging power of Russia. And this was all very threatening to Korea. And the Treaty of 1882 between the U.S. and Korea was very much a treaty. Kojong, in many books I've read it, that Kojong thought that the U.S. was a long ways away, so it would be a neutralizer in this conflict, or this, shall we say, this colonialization drive, and that the Americans could be trusted. But certain things after the treaty really accentuated this. In 1884, Allen arrived from China. He was a Northern Presbyterian missionary. He served 9 years as a missionary and then became the third legation officer or de facto ambassador in Korea. And I think the incident should be remembered because he had one drug that works. It was a malaria drug called quinine, or in Korean, quininaje they call it. And he was very effective in treating fever diseases. In 1885 is the most important incident medically, and that is the attempted assassin of Min Young-ik, the Queen's nephew. This is a very important event because unlike probably Japanese or Chinese thinking, the Korean under Taewon-gun were very, very isolated. But in the middle of the night, a decision was made to call the foreigner. Let's try the foreign doctor. And fortunately, internal medicine skills were very limited because he had very few medications in, but Allen was an excellent surgeon. And he stopped the bleeding in 2 blood vessels in the neck of young Minister Min, and he spent all night sewing up Min, and he tended to Min's wound for 3 solid months. It took 3 months for Min to recover. And when Min recovered and came back to the court, King Kojong was, His Excellency King Kojong was very, very happy. And so he took the houses of the attempted assassins and he, in a joint venture, said to Allen, teach our people your medicine. And this is the founding of Severance in Yonsei University. Very nice story. The second incident that I want to, happening that I want to bring you up to date is my father fought after the Incheon landing. He ran Incheon port as a naval officer. He helped run the naval port. My uncle, my mother's younger brother, fought in the Changjinu, or in English we call it the Chosun River, or Chosun Reservoir campaign. But in the Changjinu Chuntu, they were leaving out of Hamhung and being evacuated to Busan. And in that incident, there was a great man called Hyun Bong-hak that very few people know. Hyun Bong-hak met with Colonel Forney, who was a U.S. Military, USFK at that time, and he convinced Colonel Forney to dump all of the military equipment in the ocean and take on refugees. There were 200,000 refugees in Hamhung, and they were able to evacuate 97,000 refugees. Hyun Bong-hak is known as the Schindler of Korea, and I would like to also point out that the former president's father and mother, Moon Jae-in's father and mother, President Moon Jae-in and his father and mother, were on that ship that came from Hamhung to Busan. Finally, I want to keep this as brief as possible. Severance Hospital was located in front of Seoul Station from 1904 till the Korean War. And after the Korean War, there were great negotiations between the 8th Army and Yanni, the Underwoods, who started Yanni School, Yanni College, and Severance. And so they decided to join and take one syllable from both. Many people don't know that. Yanni and Severance became Yonsei. but the American military was involved in reconstruction in building the first hospital on the Shincheon campus that has running water and central heating, and it was a huge step to help Korea in its horrible time after the Korean War. So not just in war, these partnerships were the excellence of Korean doctors and the rebuilding money from the U.S. Military. So all three of these involved partnerships. Number one, His Majesty King Gojong and Allen. Number two, the Hungnam evacuation and the Mr. Can I say Schindler, Hyun Bong-ak of the graduate of Severance Hospital or Severance Medical School, and then finally the combination of the Underwood School of Yonny and Severance with the money from the U.S. military, but by the know-how of Korean doctors and Korean professors. Thank you very much.
Dr. Lin, once again, thank you so much for sharing your personal reflection on the historical, side of your involvement here for you and your family. Thank you. And now let me turn to the Honorable Na Kyung-won, the former National Assemblywoman and a member of the Conservative Party. I actually consider Ms. Na a very good friend. In fact, she always picks up my phone call when I call her. So that's why I call her a friend. But obviously, she's had an amazing career. The first female head of the party. I've known her for 2 decades, and she just got back to serve as the presidential special envoy to the Davos Forum. She started her political career in 2002. She's a 4-term member of the National Assembly, and she's also was a judge here in South Korea. I believe she will continue to have an amazing political career, not just now, but beyond. She offers so much for South Korea. So I'm very, very interested in hearing about your observations as it relates to the 140 years that Korea and the United States have enjoyed together. I know you have a lot to share.
저는 한국어가 좀 편해서 한국어로 말하겠습니다. 좋은 말씀해 주셔서 감사하고요. 오늘 이렇게 패널들께서 각자의 경험에 맞추신 이야기를 하셨는데요. 저는 역시 정치인이니까 한미 동맹 140년에서 정치적으로 무엇이 중요할까 해서 저는 역시 첫 번째는 우리 한미 상호 방위 조약을 체결한 1953년을 말씀드릴 수밖에 없습니다. 사실 대한민국이 2차 세계대전 이후에 이 원조를 받던 나라에서 원조를 하는 나라로 발전하게 된 이런 안보와 경제에 있어서 안보가 튼튼하고 경제가 발전하게 된 근간은 역시 한미 동맹이라고 생각을 하고 그 한미 동맹을 실질적으로 만들어준 한미 상호 방위 조약 1953년에 한미 상호 방위 조약이 가장 의미 있었던 저는 중요한 사건이라고 생각을 합니다. 사실 이 한미 상호 방위 조약을 체결한 이승만 대통령이 그런 면에서 저는 대한민국에서 굉장히 존경받고 평가받아야 된다고 생각을 하는데 지금 대한민국의 역사에서 사실 이승만 대통령의 평가가 매우 낮게 되어 있는 부분에 대해서 저는 한미동맹 140주년을 생각하면서 다시 한번 좀 안타깝다라는 말씀을 드립니다. 그다음에 이제 두 번째로 저는 한 가지 더 중요한 한미동맹 140년을 생각할 때 중요한 일은 이게 제가 꼭 여당 정치인이라서 말씀을 드리는 것은 아닌데 저는 이번에 바이든 대통령과 윤석열 대통령의 정상회담이라고 생각을 합니다. 여러분들도 다 보셨다시피 공동선언문이 거의 책으로 한 권인 것처럼 아주 길었습니다. 이게 보통은 공동선언문 그냥 우리가 한번 들면 쑥 읽을 수 있었을 텐데 이번 공동선언문은 한 번에 그냥 간단히 읽기는 굉장히 양이 많았습니다. 왜 제가 꼭 여당 정치인이라서 이번 정상회담이 중요하다고 말씀을 드리는 것이 아니라 사실 한미 동맹은 매우 튼튼하다. 늘 한국과 미국이 이야기하지만 사실은 보수 정권이냐 진보 정권이냐에 따라서 굉장히 이 한미 동맹은 때로는 조금은 덜 튼튼하게, 때로는 아주 강하게 운용되었던 것이 사실입니다. 그런데 사실 이제 지난 5년 문재인 정권이 잘한 것도 있고 잘못한 것도 있습니다만 사실 북한 문제, 특히 북핵 문제를 다루는 데 있어서 조금은 좀 성급하고 조금은 조급했던 것이 사실이라는 것을 잘 아실 겁니다. 그런데 이것이 단순히 한미 간의 이런 안보에 있어서의 차이만을 가져오는 것이 아니라 지금 한미 동맹은 안보 동맹뿐만 아니라 경제 동맹으로까지 진화해야만 하는 시기인데 이러한 북한 문제에 있어서의 시각 차이, 조금은 성급함이 사실은 경제 동맹으로 가는 데 있어서 걸림돌이 되었다고 생각을 합니다. 특히 지금 뭐 우크라이나 사태라든지 이런 것으로 인해서 세계 이 통상에 있어서 free trade보다는 free but secure, secure가 강조되고 글로벌 공급망을 어떻게 구축하느냐에 대한 굉장한 고민이 있을 때 이 튼튼한 한미 동맹이 안보 동맹을 넘어서 경제 동맹으로 가는 데 있어서 이번에 윤석열 대통령이 탄생하지 않았다면 우리가 상당히 어려움이 있지 않았을까. 그래서 저는 이번 정상회담이 굉장히 중요하고 그래서 저는 대한민국이 사실 국운이 있다고 생각을 합니다. 왜냐하면 이번에는 보수 정권이 들어서는 것이 아주 적확한 타임이었다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 이번에 한미 정상회담에서 앞으로의 한미 동맹이 글로벌 포괄적 전략 동맹으로 발전할 것이라고 이야기했습니다. 저는 여기서 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 안보 동맹을 넘어선 경제 동맹까지 가는 포괄적 전략 동맹의 의미에 있어서의 의미를 말씀드렸고 또 하나는 글로벌입니다. 사실은 지금 제가 아까 우크라이나 사태를 말씀드리기도 했지만 이번 취임사에서 윤석열 대통령께서 강조한 것이 자유였습니다. 자유를 35번을 언급했는데 자유라는 단어를 그 자유에서는 단순히 대한민국 국민의 자유가 아니라 전 세계 시민의 자유를 언급했습니다. 기아, 빈곤 또는 공권력, 군사력에서의 자유를 언급했습니다. 그러니까 한마디로 대한민국이 앞으로 국제적 위상에 맞는 중추 역할을 하겠다라는 거에서 자유를 언급했는데요. 결국 한미 동맹이 글로벌 포괄적 전략 동맹이 된다는 것은 이 글로벌한 부분에 있어서의 한국의 책임도 앞으로 강조하겠다는 것을 의미한다는 점에서 매우 의미 있는 그런 저는 이벤트라고 봐야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 제가 이제 조금 전에 다보스 포럼 말씀하셨는데요. 다보스 포럼 특사를 가서 제가 펀더 라이언 EU 집행위원장하고도 면담을 하게 됐는데 그때도 똑같은 생각을 하게 되었습니다. 펀더 라이언 EU 집행위원장도 사실은 이 가치, 자유, 인권 가치를 강조하고 그 전 세계에 있어서 이것을 어떻게 더 많이 공유할 수 있겠느냐에 대한 말씀을 하셨는데요. 결국 대한민국이 이번 새 정권에서 가치 외교 그리고 책임을 강조하는 부분은 앞으로 한미 동맹을 통해서 또는 한미 동맹 이외의 다른 국가와 함께 해서 더 전 세계에 있어서의 자유에 대한 책임을 가지게 될 것이다. 그래서 저는 두 가지를 가장 중요한 이벤트라고 꼽겠습니다.
And I think it's amazing that Ms. Na is representing President Yoon as a special envoy to Davos, because it's obviously a very, very important forum, and her knowledge, her insights is exactly what is important and needed at the at the Davos Forum. So thank you so much, and welcome back. I'm going to now move on to Scott Snyder. But before I go to Scott Snyder, we're going to have an extensive Q&A session. So please think about questions, during this the next two panelists. And our speakers here, they want to hear from you. So please get ready. So now our next speaker is Mr. Scott Snyder. He's a senior fellow for the Korea Studies and Director of Program on U.S. Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. I think this is my second time seeing you, Scott, in the past, 3 weeks. So Scott loves Korea. He's what I call a leading Korea expert. He has provided a lot of advice to both non-governmental and humanitarian organizations, especially in North Korea. So Scott, you've been following the geopolitical developments of U.S.-Korea relations for, the past several decades. What would you say are the most notable developments?
Well, thank you, James. I really, truly feel like I am the least qualified and least deserving member of this particular panel. So it's a real honor for me to be here, and I'm really grateful to Asan Institute for the opportunity to participate. I only came here in 1987 for the first time, so only about 34 years, no family background. But of course, I'm really regretting, having watched the movie, that I don't have a soundtrack or any pictures to show. And so, what really stands out to me through the video and through what we've heard so far is that over the course of 140 years, we've seen tremendous changes and transformation in the United States, on the Korean Peninsula. But I think that there are two consistent through lines that go from 1882 to the present. And one is Korea's geography has not changed, and its challenge of being surrounded by larger and more powerful neighbors has not changed. And the second thing has not changed is the strategic logic that was reflected in King Kojong's Korea strategy for opening to the outside world. And it was encapsulated at the time in the phrase, stay close to China, associate with Japan, ally with America. And of course, the alliance didn't begin until 70 years later, but the seed was planted, and then it was germinated in 1953, and now I think that we're seeing the flowering of this relationship. So what I think is really striking, and maybe the critical question that we should ask, is what are the key factors that have enabled the relationship to flower in the way that it has? And as I think about the history of the relationship, there are three things that stand out. One is the willingness of alliance partners to share capabilities in the interests of the other's political and security interests. And of course, that's exactly what happened during the Korean War, where the United States came to the defense of South Korea. But it also happened under Park Chung-hee, where he sent troops to Vietnam in order to meet a political need of the Johnson administration. And more recently, I think that we have seen it happen even last year when the Moon administration, President Moon, came to Washington with a particular immediate need related to he needed to bring vaccines back to South Korea. And the U.S., of course, responded to that. But likewise, on the South Korean side, the U.S. had a political need related to the source of immigration coming up from Central America, and South Korea made a significant contribution to trying to stabilize that. So sharing capabilities in order to meet political need. Second, I think that the issue of shared values is critical. And what really stands out to me that I recalled while watching the video was actually the memoir of Ambassador Hyun Hong-ju, the ambassador who was in Washington during the No Tae-woo administration. And what he talked about at that time is how he had to go to the White House in order to make an ask. He needed to get a summit meeting for NOTAU with then President George H.W. Bush. And he thought it was going to be a really hard push because historically South Korea, as a small country, had to really fight to get that attention. But what he talked about is how his requests were greeted with welcome because Korea was a new democracy. And I think that the democratic transformation of South Korea has enabled a much closer partnership between the two sides. And I think the final issue that really stands out is related to balance between the two parties. I mean, after all, the initial relationship between the US and South Korea at the formation of the alliance was really a patron-client relationship. The US was providing South Korea's military and economic development budget. But what we see today is a transformation, especially in the recent joint vision statements and both the Moon Biden and the Yoon Biden statements. We see the transformation of South Korea from a security consumer to a security provider in the context of the broadening of commitment between the US and South Korea to work together globally. And so I think that partnership is really critical. And the other element that really stands out, of course, is that we're moving to a two-way relationship in which the US is playing a military role in support of South Korean security, but we see South Korean investment coming into the United States. And so I think that what that means is that going forward, we're in a much stronger position. And so those are the elements that I see that have really allowed this relationship to flower and bloom in ways that I think were totally unanticipated in 1882.
You know, Scott, thank you so much for your valuable insights. In fact, you know, amongst the panelists here, you're the only one living in Washington, D.C. So I think your perspective and how you cheerlead the relationship is really, really important. So thank you so much for all you do. And last but not least, let me now turn to the Honorable Ambassador Joseph Yoon. I actually call him my big brother, 큰 형님.
You're making me feel very old.
Well, because you are older than me, so that makes you older, right? But I consider Ambassador Joe Yoon a very, very good friend. We've had many opportunities to host him at AmCham. And I gotta tell you, he's one of the smartest Korean Americans I've ever met. And he explains it in such plain language. He's very insightful. And he is always one of our top draws at AmCham. So thank you so much for being here, Joe. For those who may not know who he is, he's a 33-year career diplomat. He's also a seasoned negotiator. I like to say he's an expert in Asia-Pacific affairs. I know you've had, many, many years in the State Department. You were also the special representative for the North Korea policy. You're also the U.S. ambassador to Malaysia. In fact, he's one of the first Korean Americans to be a U.S. ambassador, along with our good friend Sung Kim, who I know that we all revere as well. So Joe, I'd like you to kind of comment on a few things that we talked about today, especially starting with the question of what makes Korea-U.S., the relationship, so special or unique. I know every country in the world talks about a special relationship with America, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, James, and thank you for that really overly generous introduction. I was going to talk about 140 years, going year by year, 140 of them, but mercifully for all of you, I didn't want all of you to fall asleep. So I will take your cue and answer your questions. As you mentioned, I've mostly worked in U.S. State Department, 33 years. In fact, I retired, but I just got back about a couple of months ago. I'm now what they call special presidential envoy for Pacific issues, compact negotiation. That's very complicated, so I won't go into that. But I had a privilege of working 8 years at the US Embassy in Seoul, and I also, of course, dealt quite a lot with bilateral issues while I was in State Department. So I wanted to pick out 3 events that I witnessed, kind of closely, and see what the lessons are. These are not necessarily big events, but to me, they were significant events that kind of pointed to where we are in US-South Korea relationship. The first thing I witnessed was that made a big impact on me was the 1997 election of Kim Dae-jung. It was, I would say, complete democratic transition, yielding legitimacy, authority, and of course it took place during what's known as IMF crisis. And the way that Kim Dae-jung dealt with the crisis and the way that Washington helped with the crisis, I think really pointed to a new direction. I would say new transition in the relationship. I remember one day after the DJ got elected at the time, Ambassador Bosworth and I paid a call on him at his house. It was a modest house in Ilsan, and we had a discussion, and he completely convinced us and Washington how to get the house in order. So to me, that pointed to significance of democracy, significance of this long-time opposition leader getting elected, who had so much credibility in terms of human rights, personal, history, and this is why I think him and Bill Clinton formed the closest of the relationship I have witnessed as heads of state. And I think it was from that time we all emphasized how important the relationship is between 2 heads of state. The second incident was I came back to Korea about 10 years later, and every night I came out of the embassy and there were just huge protests outside. People who were protesting over beef. And this was completely alien to Americans. Why on earth are Koreans protesting over beef? Most Koreans, once they get off the plane in LA, they'll go have LA kalbi, And so this was completely, and I discussed this with Trade Minister who is here, Minister Kim Jong-un at the time, and of course Wendy was our FTA negotiator. And Washington sticking with, we want it to be science-based. That was completely alien to thinking here, and simply put, Washington could not believe that this newly elected government of Lee Myung-bak could fall because of beef issues. And so that made me think there is a fundamental gap, a gap in understanding, a gap on how we communicate. And I think some of those gaps remain. And to me, that pointed out that really the relationship must mature further. So these gaps, whether they are cultural values or domestic politics, somehow have to be reduced. My third item I wanted to mention was actually 2 weeks ago when President Biden came to visit here. Typically every new president who comes to Korea, their first stop is DMZ. They'll go to DMZ, get those binoculars and watch how close it is. And this is the photo next day, a front page in Washington Post and New York Times, watching over DMZ. But President Biden's first visit was to a Samsung factory. How different is that? And Scott was talking about transformation of that relationship to me, that again shows that we are at a very important crossroads and that these transitions are happening as we speak. And I do believe there is a new mindset. And I do believe in the next session where we talk about economic issues that my colleague Rex and Ryu will moderate, you will get deeper into it. But this tells me that alliance is very much a living thing. Each incident, each occurrence has implications. And so I'm very delighted today with James. We were able to have a good talk about this. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Joe, thank you so much for an outstanding job in closing out at least this portion of this panel. But I do want to have a very quick follow-up question before I open up to the audience. The U.S. enjoys relations with so many countries, but we're talking about what's unique. But the question I wanted to ask the panelists is, why is it so unique? How did this relationship evolve where it became so unique? So I don't want to call anyone specifically, but maybe Ambassador On, you could answer that question for us.
Well, James, as a matter of fact, I think one of the reasons why you are raising this question with me is because I behaved well. In the sense that you said that opening statement would be limited to 3 minutes, and I strictly limited myself to 3 minutes. So I guess maybe you are well, in a sense, well.
You always
right.
behave well.
Right. But at the same time, what in fact explains about this, well, in fact, durable, and then the relationship which is getting stronger and stronger? Well, during my time as an ambassador in Washington, D.C. in 2013, that in fact was the 60th anniversary of the alliance between Korea and the United States. And then it was in fact commemorated in a big way. And at the time, of course, I was on heavy demand to go around the town talking about the alliance, etc., etc. And this, in fact, is a question I asked myself. I mean, what explains this fact that this alliance, after 60 years, is getting stronger and stronger? And I think on both sides, of course, we understood about the necessity about the alliance itself. But at the same time, I think on both sides, both in Seoul as in Washington D.C., they understood about the necessity of adapting the alliance to the changing environment and changing issues. That, in fact, is something we've been doing very well. And then that, in fact, is the reason why I talked about, for my initial opening statement, that's the reason why I talked about how the Korean War impacted our bilateral relationship, and how the end of the Cold War impacted our relationship, and how now, as we face all these challenges to the values we share between Korea and United States, democracy, human rights, rule of law, now why we should be working together even more closely to defend this, all these values underlying our relationship. But this morning I was listening to Dr. Kissinger, Foreign Minister Park, etc., etc., and one word which in fact really attracted my attention was what the Foreign Minister Park said. And then what he said was that when President Biden came for the first time, then he said, "This is incredible," right? And then towards the end of the visit, then he said, "Well, I trust you. I trust you." So that, in fact, is something I read in the newspaper, but at the same time, I just heard it from Foreign Minister Park, who in fact was on the spot, listening to our two presidents, President Biden saying this to President Yoon, saying, "I trust you." And the reason why it attracted my attention so much is because what is the best guarantee for the durability of the alliance between our two countries? I think that is the trust. And where from time to time I tell myself, where somehow the decision makers as well as the opinion makers in both our countries, sometimes they do things, they say things which in fact seriously undermine the trust. And then that, in fact, is what worries me from time to time. And the kind of conversation we are having this morning, I think they will go a long way in restoring and re-strengthen the trust between our two countries. Thank you.
And I thought that, Foreign Minister Park Jin I've heard him speak maybe 100 times. I thought his speech today was one of the best I've heard, and it resonated so nicely with all of us. But just my final question is for Dr. Litton. You and your family came to Korea years ago. You guys could have gone to any other country. You could have stayed here for a few years and left. Why did you guys stay in Korea? What makes this so special and unique for you?
The answer is probably something that nobody would expect. My grandmother was born to my great-grandparents during the Kewagi, the opening of Korea. And it was a very difficult time for Korea. And then my father was born in the middle of the Japanese occupation. I was born right after the Korean War. And I think the strongest glue that kept our family from leaving and having a long, hopefully not from the head but from the heart, was seeing the Korean spirit in overcoming difficulties and persevering and winning. And it reminds me of I don't agree with North Korean slogans, but one slogan in North Korea knocked me over. 길은 험난해도 웃으면서 가자. Even if the road is arduous, let us go forward with a smile. And I think that is what my children, I have a confession to make, don't have as strong ties with Korea, because Korea was coming on par with the U.S., a very wealthy country. So they 그런 안타까운 마음이 없어요. I think the cement was from being poor together. Does that make any sense? We're happy now. We were poor and we were happy, but now we are rich and unhappy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now with the balance of the time we have, I'd like to open it up to the floor. This is such a special opportunity where we have 7 amazing panelists who can share a lot of interesting insights and knowledge. So do I have a volunteer for the first question for this panel? Let's not be shy, everybody. Then while you're thinking about it, then let me ask another question for the panel. Please, I do want to have some questions from the audience. So the next question I have, and I'd like to open it up to the panelists, is what do you think are the most significant contributions the U.S.-Korea relations have in maintaining peace and security? And I'd like Assemblywoman Na Kyung-won to answer that question.
한미 동맹이
네, 맞아요. Security 대접.
너무 기본적인 걸 물어보시니까 대답하기
You're the
어렵네요.
best at it, so.
사실 이제 대한민국은 2차 세계 대전 이후 휴전선으로 나뉘고 6.25 전쟁 이후 38선으로 나뉘고 6.25 전쟁 이후 휴전선으로 나뉘면서 결국 평화 안정이 너무 중요했죠. 그런데 결국 한미 동맹에서의 그 안보 동맹이 결국 가장 평화와 안전을 지켜줬다고 생각을 합니다. 그런데 이제 이 평화를 어떻게 만들어 가느냐에 대해서 상당히 제가 계속 정치적인 발언을 할 수밖에 없네요. 평화를 만들어 가는 데 있어서 어떤 것이 바람직하느냐에 대해서 보수 정권과 진보 정권의 차이가 많았고요. 사실은 제가 2019년에 원내대표로서 문희상 그 당시 이제 국회의장과 같이 미국 의회를 방문했는데 떠나기 전에 한국에서는 저 혼자 야당 원내대표고 여당 또는 준여당과 같은 당의 원내대표, 문희상 국회의장님 이렇게 넷이서 얘기를 하면 저만 외계인 같더라고요. 세 분의 의견이 통일되고 저만 달랐는데 미국 가서 민주당, 공화당 의원들을 다 만나는데 저하고 그분들이 얘기가 똑같고 그래서 제가 동질감을 느꼈습니다. 미국을 가니까. 그래서 사실은 평화에 대한 생각 이런 부분에 좀 차이가 있었지만 결국은 이 뭐 우리에 있어서 튼튼한 안보는 결국 굳건한 한미 동맹 때문이었다고 생각을 하고요. 이번 제가 윤석열 정부와 그러니까 윤석열 대통령과 바이든 대통령의 정상회담이 굉장히 중요하다는 것이 저는 그동안 조금은 미국 시각과 한국 시각의 차이가 좀 있었는데 이제 다시 back to normal이라고 제가 얘기를 하는데요. 다시 조금 정상화된 것 같은 느낌이 들어서 다행이라고 생각을 합니다.
Well,
굉장히 파티즌한 것 같지만 이게 진실이라고 말씀드립니다.
no, but I think you have so much insights and knowledge on this topic. So I was compelled to ask you because I know, you have this thing wrapped up pretty well. Let me just ask a follow-up question to Ambassador, each of you. I know this is an area that you also specialize in. So can you add to, Ms. Na's comments on security and peace?
Not particularly. I have anything to add, and I don't want to be partisan. As a career diplomat of serving almost 40 years, of course, I have my personal political view also. But as a civil servant, I had to keep neutral stand when I speak, especially openly at this kind of juncture. But I totally agree with Ms. Na on that point she raises. The Korea-U.S. alliance has been the backbone and the cornerstone for Korea to make economic development, to make Korea democratized, or something like that. This is why the relationship of our two countries are very, very particular and unique because first, because of the alliance treaties, but one thing more is Korea has achieved something with the help of the United States. That makes the relationship of our two countries very unique and particular, and with which both of our two peoples, both our two countries are very much proud of.
Thank you very much. Obviously, my question was not meant to generate any partisanship at all, just rather some examples. Anybody from the audience who may have a question? Oh, there you are, right here, sir. Is there a mic for the gentleman? If you could introduce yourself and ask the question, that would be great. And to which panelist?
Yeah, I am Thomas B. Lansana from the Embassy of Sierra Leone in Seoul. I have had the privilege of listening to all the panelists, and probably I want to anchor my comments on a particular comment given by the Honorable Lady that Korean-US relationship has been that of security, but I think she is hoping that we have a holistic, partnership, i.e., security and trade. For me, I cannot see a clear dichotomy between the trade and the security. But what interests me most in all of the speakers, it is very clear that Korea and the US have an exceptional and what I will call an enviable relationship. My question there is, I think the Koreans have a message of exceptional relationship to the world. Be in Africa, be in Europe, Southeast Asia, or the like. There is something the Korean has to say in all of these years, in all of these decades, in all of this century. There is some message they have for the world, being continentally or globally. That is my own question.
Thank you very much. Do you want to ask a specific panelist a question? Do you want someone to answer, or do you want to make that comment?
I cannot recall the name, but the speaker from the second point,
No.
yeah, seems to have a reservoir of knowledge in this relationship. So I will pick on him. Thank you.
I love it, by the way. You know, obviously, he has a knowledge of the Lord of Knowledge, just given the history. So maybe, Prime Minister Lee, can you make a comment on his question, please?
뭐야?
저도 잘 모르겠습니다. Well, could I speak?
I think he's basically asking, he's seen this powerful dynamic between U.S. and Korea, right? Maybe you're trying to compare what happens in your part of the world as well, right? So you're trying to ask for, you know, what really happened and why is it so special, correct? Good.
총리님 제가 그냥 간단할까요? Well, as a matter of fact, thank you so much for that for the comment coming from the gentleman coming from Sierra Leone. Am I right? Well, it's not necessarily addressing your point, but at the same time, while I was listening to you, something came up in my mind, which is closely related with your country, Sierra Leone. That's again during my time as an ambassador in Washington D.C. That goes back to 2014, and then when I say 2014. There will be certain very traumatic memory which will be coming back to you, which is outbreak of Ebola, right? Outbreak of Ebola. Well, since 2020, then of course we are extremely concerned about Corona. But at that time, 2014, then of course we were extremely concerned about the outbreak of Ebola. And I was there as an ambassador in Washington, D.C., and I was very pleasantly impressed with what President Obama was doing. He, in fact, immediately responded by saying, okay, I'm sending 3,000 men strong team, medical team, to Western Africa. And then he, in fact, said we, in fact, should be, well, in a sense, concerted, whole government effort in order to respond to that. That, in fact, is precisely what he did in terms of the size of operation, in terms of the value of the operation. But at the same time, what I wish to share with you is this, which is that initiative coming from the United States, that ignited countries in Western Europe, and that ignited Korea to come up with our own medical teams to send to those countries. And in case of Korea, what I observed at the time was this, which is that in the Korean government, we said we'll be sending military medical team. We will not be sending civilian medical team. On top of it, what the Korean government said at the time was that, well, unless there will be doctors and nurses volunteering for this mission, we will not be sending anybody. That's what Korean government said at the time. I was in Washington, D.C. I was concerned if sufficient number of military doctors and military nurses would be volunteering to go and work in Western Africa, because at the time, the fear which was caused by Ebola, it was very high. So I was wondering if sufficient number of volunteers would be there. I, in fact, was proven totally wrong. We had so many volunteers coming from Korean military doctors and nurses, so we could send them to Sierra Leone, and then that led to President Obama's initiative called GHSA, Global Health Security Agenda. So that meeting was held at the ministerial level in 2014 in Washington, D.C., And then what I did at the time was this, which is I suggested to the White House, unless we have second country to host the second meeting, then of course this GHSA process would in fact not be able to continue in the days to come. And then my interlocutor in the White House, he asked me if Korea would be able to host the second meeting. And I said, well, the decision should be taken in Seoul, but I would be very glad to send the recommendation back to Seoul. That's what Korean government accepted, to host the second meeting of GHSA. That's how GHSA process started. And then Ms. Na Kyung-won, she said, well, today's joint statement, this year's joint statement between President Yoon and then President Biden, it was so lengthy and full of contents that in fact it takes time to go through it. One of the contents is Korea, in fact, is going to host GHSA meeting once again. So maybe this, in fact, could serve as a kind of episode, very specific episode, which shows very close relationship between Korea and United States, which in fact started in the area of security alliance, but at the same time, which began to spread to all the other areas, including even climate change or fight against pandemic. So I hope it could, in fact, be part of the answer to your question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I hope you're pleased with Ambassador On's answers to you, right? So, Jo Yoon, let me ask you for a follow-up on this. I think what I just heard today is that Korea is exercising really strong thought leadership. So, Joe, do you have any best practice suggestions for the gentleman who just asked the question? Maybe we could help Sierra Leone.
I think if I knew the answer, I'll be making a lot more money and not here, but let me try to rephrase the question. In the sense that the relationship between US and South Korea, what is special about it? What can other countries learn from it? And that's a tough question. I do think success breeds its own success. And so in that sense, South Korea has been successful at every venture. I remember my father telling me, because he used to be a doctor and worked for government in Korea, and he told me that, when he would visit Myanmar, Burma in the 1960s, late 50s, or Philippines, he would say, I wish Korea could be as wealthy as Burma or Philippines, okay? So I had a chance to meet with Aung San Suu Kyi as she was coming out of prison to try to normalize relationship between United States and Burma. And so Aung San Suu Kyi, I told that story to Aung San Suu Kyi, and Aung San Suu Kyi said, that's great, because these military leaders are lying. They are saying how well off Burma has done, within recent history. And Aung San Suu Kyi told me, you go ask your father to write a letter to me, saying that this was the difference between Korea and Myanmar. And my dad said, dang, do I have to do it? I meant it for you, not for her. I don't want to be, she did not want to be used politically. But in any way, he did oblige. And so, to me, South Korea kind of overcoming unique set of challenges. Challenges having to do with great powers as neighbors. Challenge of course, divided Korea, and so in that sense, there is no question that South Korea itself has bet on the US as the partner, and they have, South Koreans have stuck to it. Good for both countries because South Korea succeeded. And the key thing to me is the support, public support for the alliance. this is not a political issue between, liberals and conservatives. It's not an issue between Jinbo and Bosu, and it's not an issue in the U.S. either. You look at the polls, South Koreans consistently support. Very simple question: do you support presence of U.S. troops in Korea? Is typically 70+%. Similarly, in the U.S., it has very high support. So to me, the most important thing is succeeding at what you're doing, having credibility of that alliance, and having the public support for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I want to give a last opportunity for Ms. Na to comment on this, and then I can successfully close our panel.
아까 이 한미 동맹이 안보 동맹뿐만 아니라 경제 동맹으로 가는 것과 관련해서 뭔가 아까 질문하신 분 말씀은 우리의 동맹이 다른 국가를 배제하는 것처럼 오해하시는 것 같습니다. 저는 한미 동맹의 가치의 가장 중요한 것은 한미 동맹이 결국은 특정 국가를 배제하는 것이 아니고 또 우리끼리 뭘 잘하자라는 것이 아니라 한미 동맹의 근본적인 가치인 자유민주주의라는 가치를 더 널리 확산하려고 하는 것에 있다고 생각을 합니다. 제가 이제 최근에 다보스 포럼 때문에 출발하기 전에 대통령께 보고를 하게 됐는데 이런 말씀하십니다. 사실 지금 전 세계적으로 굉장히 중요한 이슈 중에 하나가 뭐 다보스 포럼의 이슈에도 들어갔지만 팬데믹 문제를 어떻게 극복할 거냐, 기후변화, 탄소 중립에 관한 이야기인데요. 탄소 중립에 관한 기술은 글로벌 공공재로 봐야 되는 것 아니냐 이런 언급을 하셨습니다. 실질적으로 백신도 저희가 최근에 북한의 백신을 지원하겠다 이런 언급도 했지만 북한뿐만 아니라 사실은 뭐 아프리카 접종률은 사실 16% 정도에 그치는 것으로 알고 있습니다. 이런 전 세계의 시티즌들이 모두 어떻게 보면 자유라는 가치를 향유할 수 있는데 한미 동맹이라는 틀을 통해서 더 우리가 할 수 있는 역할이 있다고 생각을 하고요. 그래서 저는 이번 올해의 한미 동맹이 글로벌 포괄적 전략 동맹으로 갔다는 것에 더 큰 의미를 두어야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 국제사회에 있어서의 한미 동맹이 단순히 한국과 미국끼리의 동맹이 아니라 이것이 국제사회의 전 세계 시민들의 자유를 증장하는 데에 저희가 그 역할을 할 것이다라는 말씀을 드리고 그동안도 했었는데 더 적극적으로 하겠다는 말씀 드리겠습니다. 고맙습니다.
Now that time is up, I wanted to again thank the panelists for participating today. I am sure that the audience really felt a lot of knowledge from all of you, the different perspectives. Even I learned a lot, so thank you so much. Just in closing, as a Korean American, I think that the relation between U.S. and Korea is really, really unbreakable, commercially, culturally, militarily. As Chairman Chung mentioned earlier today, 10 more years from now, we're going to celebrate 150 years of this really powerful, relationship. So I hope that I'll be back in 10 years. Big Joe, I hope to see you in 10 years as well. And I hope to see a lot of you back here. So thank you so much. We have another great session coming up. So thank you so much, and have a great day.